A note before we begin. You almost didn't open this. Maybe you're standing somewhere right now, phone in hand, earbuds half in, doing that thing where you browse titles the way you browse restaurant menus when you're not actually that hungry. Scrolling, skimming, almost committing, pulling back. And then something stopped you here. I want to tell you something before your rational mind talks you out of it. That pause was not random. The part of you that hesitated, that slowed down just enough to read the title twice. That part already knows something the rest of you is still arguing about. It knows you're not here by accident, and this is not going to be another book that tells you to wake up at 5 a.m., optimize your morning routine, and manifest your dream life by Thursday. This is something older than that, something that was figured out by human beings who had no productivity apps, no self-help shelves, no life coaches, and yet somehow understood the architecture of a meaningful life with a clarity that most modern content has completely lost. This is a book about why you feel what you feel when you're doing the wrong thing with your life, and more importantly, what to do about it. Stay with me. The next 30 seconds are going to tell you everything. Introduction. The signal you've been ignoring. Let me describe someone to you. They're not failing. In fact, by every external measure, they're doing fine. Decent job, relationships that mostly work, a life that photographs reasonably well. They sleep, they eat, they show up. But there's this thing that happens at the end of certain days, days that were full, even productive, where they sit down and feel something they can't quite name. It's not sadness exactly. It's not exhaustion, though they are tired. It's more like the feeling of having eaten a full meal and still being hungry, like something essential went untouched. They've learned to ignore it, or distract from it, or reframe it as gratitude deficiency or overthinking or just a phase. But it keeps coming back. If you recognized yourself in that description, even a little, this book is for you. Because what I just described is not a mental health symptom. It's not an attitude problem. It's not ingratitude or laziness or some vague spiritual crisis. It's a signal. Specifically, it's the signal of a life that is running slightly or significantly off the frequency it was designed to run on, and understanding that signal, where it comes from, what it's trying to tell you, and what happens when you finally listen to it, that's what the next several hours of your life are about. The ancient world had a word for this frequency. In the Sanskrit tradition, one of the oldest continuously practiced intellectual and spiritual frameworks in human history, they called it Dharma. And before you close this book, because that word sounds too mystical or too Eastern or too far from your Monday morning, hear me out. Because what Dharma actually means is one of the most practical, grounded, and urgently relevant concepts you will ever encounter. It means, in its most fundamental sense, the specific nature of a thing, the law of what something most genuinely is. The sun's dharma is to radiate. The river's dharma is to flow. The seed's dharma is to become the specific tree encoded in its core. Not a different tree, not a better tree, it's tree. And you have one too. Not a destiny written in the stars. Not a cosmic script you must decode before you're allowed to live your life. Something more intimate and more immediate than that. A specific quality of consciousness. A particular combination of gifts and wounds and ways of seeing the world that only you carry, and that the world is genuinely, specifically waiting for. This book is about finding that, living it, And understanding, maybe for the first time with full clarity, why not living it has cost you more than you realized. We're going to cover 6 territories in this journey: the law itself, the illusion that covers it, the essential nature underneath, the map of your soul's journey, the practical reality of living this way in an ordinary week, and finally, the part that changes everything, what it means for the world when you stop holding back. Let's go. Chapter 1. The law that has always governed your life, whether you know it or not. Here's something that nobody tells you when you're growing up. The universe is not neutral about your existence. I don't mean that in a woo-woo way. I mean it in the most structural, literal, architectural sense possible. The intelligence that assembled you, however you understand that intelligence, whether you call it God or evolution or the cosmos or just life, did not assemble you generically. It assembled you specifically. There is a version of you that would look at that statement and dismiss it immediately. The version trained by years of being told to be realistic, to not think too highly of yourself, to understand that you're not that special, that billions of people have come and gone, and most of them weren't particularly unique in any world-changing way. I'd like to talk directly to that version of you for a moment. You're not wrong that billions of people have lived and died without becoming historical figures, but you're confusing significance with visibility. You're measuring contribution by applause rather than by necessity. And that confusion, that specific mistake, is one of the main reasons so many intelligent, capable, genuinely gifted people spend their lives playing a much smaller and much less satisfying game than the one they were built for. The Dharmic law, the cosmic law of essential nature, does not work on a hierarchy of impressive contributions. It doesn't rank the famous above the quiet. It doesn't value the world-famous surgeon above the person who raised 3 children with unconditional presence and turned all 3 of them into human beings who genuinely understood what love looks like. The law works on a principle of necessity. Every specific configuration of consciousness that gets assembled into a human life is necessary in the same way that every instrument in a perfectly written symphony is necessary. Remove the cello, and the piece doesn't become slightly less beautiful. It becomes something fundamentally different, something incomplete in a way that only someone who heard the original composition would even be able to identify, but that anyone who paid close attention could feel. You are that cello, or that violin, or that percussion section that the whole piece hinges on in measures 7 and 32, and at the final crescendo. And the question this chapter is asking you to sit with is simple. Are you playing? The 3 pillars. Across every tradition that has engaged seriously with this concept, Vedic, Buddhist, Taoist, Egyptian, Hermetic, the law of essential nature rests on 3 foundations. They've been articulated in different languages and through different metaphors, but they point to the same 3 things consistently enough that it's worth naming them directly. The first is recognition of your essential self, not the self that formed in response to your environment, not the self that was shaped by what got rewarded and what got punished in your early years, the self that existed before all of that started happening, the one that shows up, sometimes without warning, in moments when you forget to manage yourself, and feels, in those moments, startlingly and completely real. The second is the expression of your specific gifts. And here's the thing about this that most conversations about purpose miss entirely. Your gifts are not general. They are not I'm creative, or I'm empathetic, or I'm good with people. They are specific. The particular way you solve problems, the angle from which you see situations that others don't naturally access, the specific quality of presence you bring to a room, to a conversation, to a piece of work. That specificity is the whole point. A generic gift serves no one in particular. A specific gift serves exactly the person who is waiting for exactly that. The third pillar is service. This is where the Dharmic law distinguishes itself most clearly from the modern self-help conversation about passion and purpose. Dharma is not about doing what makes you feel good. It's about doing what you were assembled to do and offering that doing in the direction of something beyond yourself. The gift that is hoarded, perfected in private, expressed only when the conditions are safe enough, is not yet fully alive. A gift becomes a gift the moment it's given. Why the law makes itself known through discomfort. Here's the thing about the Dharmic law that nobody wants to hear, but everybody needs to. It doesn't stay quiet when you violate it. Not loudly, not dramatically. It doesn't send you a memo or crash your life in obvious ways, at least not at first. What it does is more subtle and, in the long run, more persistent than any dramatic signal. It aches. There's a very specific quality to the ache of a life running against its own nature. You've probably felt it. It's the feeling at the end of a perfectly successful day that something important didn't happen. It's the way certain achievements, the ones you worked hardest for, the ones that came with the most external validation, sometimes feel the most hollow once you actually have them. It's the restlessness that no amount of vacation or entertainment or achievement can fully quiet, because the restlessness isn't about needing a break. It's about needing to be what you actually are. The law is not punishing you when it produces that ache. It's communicating with you. It's doing the only thing a law that cares about your wholeness can do when you keep moving in the wrong direction. It keeps pointing you back. The question isn't whether you've felt this. The question is whether you're ready to stop calling it something else. Chapter 2. The Illusion. How you ended up living someone else's life. Let me tell you about a person I'll call Marcus. Marcus is 41. He works in financial services. He's good at his job, genuinely good, the kind of good that comes from discipline and intelligence and years of accumulated expertise. He earns well. He lives in a nice apartment in a city he chose because the career opportunities were excellent there. His colleagues respect him. His parents are proud of him, and Marcus has not felt fully himself in approximately 17 years. He knows this, dimly, the way you know something when you've taught yourself not to think about it directly. He's made peace with it. He's reframed it as maturity, understanding that adult life involves trade-offs, that the idealistic version of yourself you carried at 23 was naive, that this is simply what responsible living looks like. But then something happens. Maybe it's a weekend where he ends up helping a friend think through a complex emotional situation, and for 3 hours he's completely alive in a way he can't remember being in years. Or maybe it's a Thursday evening when he picks up a guitar he stopped playing a decade ago, and 20 minutes become 2 hours, become a kind of presence he hasn't touched in so long it almost startles him. And in those moments, Marcus feels something that he immediately, efficiently buries. Because feeling it too clearly would require him to ask questions whose answers could be genuinely inconvenient. Marcus is living what the ancient Indian philosophical tradition called Maya. Not illusion in the sense of something fake, not a hallucination. Something more precise and more challenging than that. The mistaking of something real, but partial, for the whole truth. The Marcus who is good at financial services is real. His expertise is real. His discipline is real. But it's the surface of Marcus, the adapted version, the one that learned which qualities got rewarded and amplified those, and learned which qualities seemed impractical or embarrassing and quietly suppressed those. And over years of living from the surface, Marcus has genuinely forgotten that there's a depth underneath. This is what Maya does. Not in a single dramatic moment, through the slow, steady, socially reinforced accumulation of the performed self over the essential one. How the shaping happens. You were not born performing. Watch a 2-year-old and you will see an entity with remarkable specificity, clear preferences, strong reactions, unmistakable individuality that hasn't yet learned to be ashamed of itself. 2-year-olds have not yet been told that the things that make them most themselves are inconvenient. Then the shaping begins. None of it malicious. The people who shaped you loved you, most of them. They were simply doing what was done to them, passing forward the particular configuration of beliefs and behaviors and survival strategies that had worked more or less for the world they knew. They taught you through thousands of interactions too subtle to be called lessons, which version of yourself was acceptable and which needed adjustment. You learned fast. Children always do, because belonging and love and approval are not nice-to-haves for a child. They are survival currency, and the child who learns quickly which parts of themselves generate warmth and which generate concern or criticism or withdrawal is a child who is optimizing for the most important thing in their world. So you optimized. You led with what worked. You tucked away what didn't. You built a version of yourself that was genuinely capable of navigating your particular environment. And you got so good at wearing that version that eventually you stopped experiencing it as a costume. It felt like skin. That is Maya in its most intimate and most consequential form. The 3 layers of illusion. The ancient traditions identified Maya operating through 3 distinct layers, each subtler than the last, each more difficult to recognize, because it's been worn so long it no longer feels like something you're wearing. The first layer is the story of who you are, the narrative identity constructed from roles and experiences and labels, the responsible one, the creative one, the one who survived, the one who couldn't quite make it work. These stories are not without truth. They emerge from real things that happened to a real person, but they are the map, not the territory, and a life built entirely from the map, however detailed, however carefully maintained, will always carry a specific kind of incompleteness at its foundation. The second layer is conditioning so deep it feels like reality. Not the stories you consciously tell about yourself, but the assumptions so embedded in your perception that you no longer experience them as assumptions at all. The belief that your particular gifts are not serious enough to build a life around. The conviction that wanting more is ungrateful. The unconscious equation of full self-expression with arrogance or of genuine desire with selfishness. These are not thoughts you chose. They are the sediment of early experience settled so deeply into the architecture of your perception that they present themselves not as beliefs, but as facts about how the world works. The third layer is fear that lives in the body, not the mind. This is Maya's most effective enforcer because it doesn't argue with you. It doesn't present reasons or make cases. It contracts. It makes the prospect of living more fully from your genuine nature feel at a level beneath rational thought, like a threat to something essential. The nervous system doesn't distinguish between a predator in the woods and the prospect of being truly seen. Both register as danger. Both produce the same response. Get smaller, stay safe, don't expose yourself. Understanding these three layers isn't an exercise in self-criticism. It's an act of self-archaeology, because you cannot move toward the life you were designed for while mistaking the costume for your actual face. When Maya wears the clothes of purpose. Here's the part that requires the most honest attention, because it's the part that catches even sincere people who have been on this path for years. Maya doesn't always look like confusion. Sometimes, and this is its most sophisticated form, it looks like purpose. The person who has turned their wound into their entire identity and called it their mission. The person whose career is built around being needed, because being truly seen without the justification of usefulness feels like too great a risk. The person whose ambition, even to themselves, especially to themselves, is indistinguishable from the unresolved need to finally earn the approval of someone who withheld it. These are not failures of character. They are sophisticated expressions of the adapted self wearing the clothes of authenticity. The difference between this and genuine Dharma is felt, not thought. Real purpose carries a quality of rightness that doesn't require constant external confirmation to feel real. It doesn't collapse in the absence of applause. It sustains itself even in difficulty. Not because life in alignment is without challenge, but because the challenge feels like the right kind. Like friction on a surface you're actually supposed to be climbing. Maya purpose, by contrast, needs maintenance. It needs the audience. It produces achievement, but not rest. Recognition, but not the deep satisfaction of a thing genuinely and essentially done. Chapter 3. Svabhava, remembering what you were before the world told you who to be. There's a moment you can access if you're willing to look for it. Not a dramatic moment, not an awakening, something quieter than that. A moment, probably from childhood, but maybe more recent, when you were so completely absorbed in something that the self-monitoring stopped. The part of you that is always watching how you come across, always adjusting, always calculating. It just went quiet. And what was left in that silence was something so unguarded, so effortless, so unmistakably you that it almost felt like a different person, except it felt more like you than usual. Startlingly, uncomplicatedly, completely like yourself. That wasn't a fluke. That was your Svabhava, your essential nature, surfacing through a gap in the performance. The Sanskrit word is composed of two roots, svā, meaning one's own, and bhava, meaning nature, being, or becoming. Together, they describe something the Vedic tradition considered the most important thing you could possibly understand about yourself. The irreducible, essential, prior to conditioning quality of who you actually are. Your Svabhava is not your personality. Personality is largely learned, a specific configuration of traits that emerged from the interaction between your essential nature and the environment you were raised in. Your Svabhava is what was there before the personality formed, the raw, specific, irreplaceable quality of consciousness that you brought into this life, the particular way you perceive, the specific texture of attention you carry, the unique combination of sensitivities and capacities that makes your engagement with the world recognizably, unmistakably, irreducibly yours. One of the most direct expressions of this wisdom comes from the Bhagavad Gita, one of the most concentrated articulations of Dharmic understanding ever written. In it, the teacher tells the student that it is better to fulfill one's own Dharma imperfectly than to fulfill another's Dharma perfectly. The word used is Svadharma, the Dharma that belongs specifically to your Svabhava, the purpose that emerges directly from your essential nature, not the most impressive purpose, not the most socially validated purpose, yours. This teaching was radical in its original context. It is equally radical now. How to recognize your essential nature. The practical question that immediately follows an introduction to Svabhava is always the same. How do I know what mine actually is? How do I distinguish the signal from all the noise? The ancient traditions answer this not with personality assessments or structured frameworks, but with what might be called recognition markers, qualities of experience that signal the presence of Svabhava, not just as a concept to understand, but as a reality being lived. The first marker is effortlessness, and I need to be precise here because this is often misunderstood. I'm not talking about things that are easy in the sense of requiring no skill. I'm talking about activities where the effort flows rather than drains, where hours pass in what feels like minutes, where you emerge not depleted, but somehow more alive than when you began. The ancient Chinese called this Wu Wei, action in complete alignment with nature. It feels nothing like the effortfulness of doing things against your grain. The second marker is disproportionate aliveness. There are subjects and activities and modes of connection in which you become noticeably, measurably more present, more lit, more fully inhabiting your own experience in a way that most of your life, by contrast, reveals itself to be only partially doing. Pay close attention to what makes you disproportionately alive, not what you're most productive at, not what earns the most validation, but what makes you, without effort or instruction, come fully awake. The third marker is the thing you cannot stop returning to, the interest that keeps resurfacing no matter how many times the practical mind dismisses it, the question that returns across years and decades in different forms, the activity you find yourself pulled back to even when there's no external reward for doing so, even when it produces no income and can't be justified by any criteria the practical world recognizes as legitimate. That persistence is not nostalgia. It is your essential nature identifying with a precision that exceeds your rational mind's capacity to understand the specific channel through which your contribution is designed to flow. The fourth marker is the resonance you feel when you see your Svabhava expressed in someone else. There's a specific quality of recognition, not envy, not simple admiration, that arises when you witness another person giving full expression to something that is also, at some deep level, yours. Something that says not just, "That's impressive," but "I know that from the inside." That recognition is Svabhava, identifying itself through the mirror of another soul's expression. What you loved before you were taught what to love, the most reliable excavation site for your essential nature, is the period before the conditioning fully took hold. Not because childhood is a time of pure, uncomplicated authenticity, it rarely is, but because the interests and fascinations that emerge before you fully absorb the world's instructions about what to care about carry a specific quality of unmediated truth? What did you move toward with spontaneous, uncalculated interest? What could you do for hours without noticing time passing? What questions kept you awake, not with anxiety, but with genuine, energized curiosity? What made you feel, even without the vocabulary to articulate it, that you were doing exactly what you were made to do? Those things were not random. They were not the accidents of your particular childhood circumstances, though the circumstances shaped the forms they took. They were the earliest legible expressions of your Svabhava, your essential nature reaching, through whatever channels were available, toward the world it was designed to meet. And here is the extraordinary thing the Dharmic tradition teaches with a certainty born of long observation. Those original orientations do not disappear under the weight of conditioning. They go quiet, they learn to wait. But they do not change. The essential nature does not transform under social pressure. It only becomes more or less accessible, more or less expressed, more or less able to make itself heard above the noise of everything that was placed over it. The wound that points to the gift. There is a teaching within this tradition that strikes most people as strange on first encounter and reveals itself, upon reflection, to be one of the most practically useful things you will ever understand about your own life. Your deepest wound and your most distinctive gift are almost always the same thing, approached from different directions. The area of your life that has produced the most sustained difficulty, the specific quality of pain that has followed you across relationships, across circumstances, across every attempt to outrun or resolve it, is not separate from your Svabhava. It is one of its most direct expressions. The person who has suffered most from not being truly seen carries the capacity to see others with a depth and completeness that people who have never felt that particular invisibility simply cannot access. The person whose early environment required them to become exquisitely attuned to the emotional states of everyone around them carries the raw material of an extraordinary capacity for empathy, a sensitivity that, directed outward in genuine service, becomes exactly the quality of understanding that someone else desperately needed. The person who has spent years feeling fundamentally misplaced in every conventional structure they were inserted into carries the outsider's angle of vision, the specific perspective that produces original thought, disruptive insight, and the kind of clarity that only becomes available to someone who was never fully absorbed by the consensus view. This is not spiritual consolation prize thinking. It is a structural observation about how Svabhava develops through experience. The gift and the wound are not opposites. They are the same territory approached from two sides, which means your history, all of it, including and especially the parts that hurt, is not an obstacle to your purpose. It is, in ways you may not yet fully see, the preparation for it. Chapter 4. The Map and the Journey. Understanding why your path has looked the way it has. Let's address the question that tends to arise at this point in the conversation. If I have a specific purpose encoded into my essential nature, and the universe is supposed to be working with me rather than against me, then why has getting there felt like trying to drive with the parking brake on? Why the circuitous route? Why the wrong turns, the long detours, the seasons of genuine confusion where every door seemed closed and the right path seemed designed to be invisible? The answer to that question requires understanding the relationship between Dharma and another concept that the Eastern traditions have given us, one that the modern world has badly oversimplified. Karma. Not the cosmic scoreboard version, not the what goes around comes around bumper sticker version, the actual, original, precise understanding of what karma is and how it operates in a human life. Because that understanding changes everything about how you interpret what has already happened to you and what is happening to you right now. The Sanskrit word karma means, at its most fundamental level, simply action. Every action generates a consequence. Every choice adds an entry to the living record of your experience and sets in motion a corresponding effect that you will, in one form or another, encounter. But here's what makes this immediately practical rather than abstractly philosophical. Your karma is the terrain through which your Dharma travels. The specific challenges that have characterized your life are not random obstacles placed between you and your purpose. They are, in most cases, the precise conditions most necessary for the development of the specific qualities your Dharma contribution requires. Consider what that means. The soul that came here to offer genuine, compassionate healing to others did not arrive with that gift fully formed, untested, independent of experience. It arrived having lived through the specific quality of difficulty that makes real compassion, not the performance of compassion, the actual thing, possible. Real compassion is not sympathy from a safe distance. It's the understanding that comes from having been in the dark place yourself. The soul that came here to speak truth in contexts where the easier path is agreement did not arrive at that capacity through a comfortable journey. It arrived having navigated over and over the specific tension between authenticity and belonging, and having developed through that navigation the combination of courage and discernment and groundedness in its own perception that makes genuine truth-telling possible without cruelty. The difficulty was not an obstacle. The difficulty was the curriculum. 3 karmic patterns worth recognizing. The traditions identify specific ways in which unresolved karmic patterns tend to appear as obstruction on the path toward dharmic fulfillment. Recognizing these in your own experience, without judgment, with the honest, clear-eyed attention the dharmic tradition consistently calls for, is one of the most useful things you can do. The first is the pattern of self-suppression. The experience of having, at some level and in some contexts, learned that full self-expression produces consequences that feel dangerous. Criticism, rejection, the loss of belonging. And so a part of you learned to manage, to lead with the acceptable version and conceal the threatening one. This adaptation, which was genuinely necessary in the context that produced it, has a way of persisting into environments where the danger no longer exists. It shows up as the specific, sometimes mysterious resistance to full self-expression that many people experience as an inexplicable ceiling on their own aliveness. The second is the wound of worthiness. The deep, often pre-verbal conviction that the self, as it actually is, with its specific gifts and desires and essential nature, is not quite enough to justify the space it would need to take up. This wound rarely announces itself directly. It's felt as a pattern of self-undermining that appears with uncanny precision exactly when genuine fulfillment is within reach. The opportunity declined at the last moment, the creative work completed but never shared, the relationship that begins to feel too good and is unconsciously dismantled. The karmic tradition understands these not as character flaws, but as echoes of old stories telling the soul something about itself that is no longer true. The third is the weight of unresolved relational history. The significant relationships in a life, the ones that carry the most charge, the deepest complexity, the most persistent emotional pull, are rarely straightforward in the karmic sense. They carry something older and heavier than the years you've known each other. And when that history is unresolved, it can function as a powerful gravitational force pulling your attention and energy into an endlessly recursive loop of unfinished business, away from the forward movement your dharmic path requires. The radical reversal. Here is the teaching that turns everything upside down in the most useful way possible. Living in alignment with your Dharma is the single most powerful accelerant of karmic resolution available to you. Most people assume the sequence goes in the other direction. They assume they need to clear the karmic debt first, resolve the patterns, heal the wounds, become sufficiently unburdened before they can begin to live their purpose. Purpose becomes the reward at the end of the healing journey. The ancient traditions invert this completely. They teach that dharmic action, action taken in genuine alignment with your essential nature in service of something larger than your own comfort, generates a specific quality of energy that dissolves karmic accumulation with a speed and completeness that years of avoidance and careful management cannot approach. This is why the person who begins, however imperfectly, to move in the direction of their genuine purpose so often reports that other areas of their life, areas that seemed completely stuck, begin to shift in ways that hadn't seemed possible before. The movement toward Dharma creates a current, and that current, once established, carries a quality of liberating momentum that extends well beyond the specific domain of purpose. You don't have to be fully healed to begin. Beginning is part of how you heal. Chapter 5. Dharma in Action. What it actually looks like to live this way on a Tuesday, let's get concrete. Because here's the trap that this kind of teaching can fall into if it's not careful. It can become the most beautifully articulated justification for inaction you've ever encountered. You read it, you feel it, you genuinely connect with something in it. And then you go back to your life and nothing changes, because nothing has been made specific enough to actually move you anywhere new. I don't want that for you. So let's talk about what this actually looks like in the texture of a real life. The myth of the grand gesture. The biggest thing that stops people from beginning to live in alignment with their Dharma is not cynicism. It's not lack of self-awareness. It's not even fear. Though fear is part of it, it's the belief that doing this requires a dramatic, total, immediate reinvention. The idea that you cannot begin to live more genuinely until you've quit the job, ended the situation, moved cities, resolved every underlying psychological pattern, and arrived at a state of readiness complete enough to justify the leap. This is a story the adapted self tells you to ensure you never actually move. Because the adapted self, the performed version, has an enormous vested interest in keeping the genuine version theoretical and distant and perpetually almost ready. The truth, as the ancient traditions have always understood it, is much more accessible and much less dramatic. Dharma in action begins with the next choice, the very next one. The small, specific, entirely undramatic choice that is available to you right now in the life you are actually living. The choice to spend 30 minutes doing the thing that makes you most alive instead of the thing that is most numbing. The choice to speak honestly in a conversation where agreement would be easier. The choice to take seriously, perhaps for the first time, the persistent signal of your own nature and to act on it, however incrementally, however imperfectly. The river does not wait for perfect conditions before it begins flowing. It moves through whatever terrain is actually present, and in moving, it finds its channel. The three movements. Across the traditions, Dharmic action is consistently described as moving through three simultaneous orientations, not sequential stages, but concurrent alignments that together constitute the posture of a soul living in genuine contact with its purpose. The first is turning inward before acting outward, not hours of meditation before every decision. The actual unguarded question asked of the actual self: is this coming from my genuine nature or from my fear? Is this direction aligned with what I actually am or with what I've learned to perform? This question doesn't require special conditions. It requires honesty, which is simpler and considerably more demanding than any formal practice. The second is acting without attachment to a specific outcome. This is the teaching at the absolute center of the Bhagavad Gita's understanding of purposeful action, and it is consistently misunderstood. It is not an instruction toward indifference. It is not permission not to care about results. It's something far more precise, the instruction to bring such complete investment in the quality of your action, the integrity, the presence, the genuine offering of what you most essentially have to give, that the outcome, whatever it turns out to be, does not determine the validity of what you did. The musician who plays with complete presence has fulfilled their action, whether the audience is 5,000 or 5. The parent who brings their full attention to a conversation with their child has fulfilled their action, whether the child ever says, "Thank you." The value of the action comes from the quality of its source, not the measurement of its reception. The third is orienting the action in service. This is what distinguishes Dharmic expression from mere self-expression. The gift that flows only inward, developed only for personal satisfaction, expressed only in private, never offered to the world, is purpose only partially realized. Completion requires contact. The river fulfills its nature not by staying in its source, but by flowing to the ground that needs it. Dharma, in the domain where you actually spend your days. For most people reading this, the domain of work is where the question of purpose feels most urgent and most unresolved, because it's where the gap between the life being performed and the life that was meant to be lived is felt most consistently, and where the practical reality of mortgages and responsibilities and the legitimate needs of people who depend on you make the instruction to follow your purpose feel, in its most naive forms, like advice designed for people with fewer constraints and better circumstances. The Dharmic tradition does not ignore this tension. It addresses it with something more useful than either quit and follow your bliss or accept that this is just how life is. It teaches that Dharmic quality can be brought to any work, that the specific way you show up for whatever is in front of you, the depth of presence you bring, the genuine care you extend, the particular gifts of your essential nature that you allow to inform even the most apparently mundane task, is itself a form of Dharmic expression. And that the soul that develops the practice of bringing that quality to what is directly in front of it is developing precisely the depth of presence and capacity for genuine offering that its dharmic contribution will ultimately require. This is not an instruction to accept limitation indefinitely. It is an instruction to begin where you are, to bring your genuine nature fully to the work that is present while simultaneously, with patience and with increasing courage, moving toward the work that is most essentially yours. Those two things are not mutually exclusive. In the Dharmic understanding, they are complementary. The practice of genuine presence in the immediate is the preparation for what's next. Dharma in your relationships. The second domain where this becomes most concrete is in how you actually show up with the people in your life. Because here's something that this kind of teaching sometimes obscures by making purpose sound like something that happens in grand, solitary moments of personal realization. Some of the most direct dharmic expression you will ever do happens in ordinary conversation. The specific quality of attention you bring to the people you love, the particular honesty you're willing to offer in relationships where dishonest comfort would be so much easier, the genuine presence you extend in moments when most people are half elsewhere, the specific way your essential nature, when it's actually present rather than being managed, touches the people around you in ways they can't always articulate but consistently remember. This is not a lesser form of living your purpose. For many people, it's the primary form. The Vedic tradition had a word for selfless service in relationship, seva, and its deeper meaning was not formal charity or voluntary work. It was any action offered to another from the space of genuine presence and care, without calculation of return, without the performance of generosity. The real thing, the quality of attention that says, I see you, not the version of you that's easiest to see, not the version that confirms what I already believe, you as you actually are right now, with everything you're carrying. That quality, offered consistently and without agenda, is Dharma in its most intimate and immediate form. When the resistance comes, there is something that happens with a consistency that traditions have documented across centuries. When a soul begins to move more deliberately in the direction of its genuine purpose, resistance, not dramatic external opposition, internal resistance, the voice that says, not yet, the fear that presents itself as practical wisdom, the sudden proliferation of reasons why this particular moment is not quite right for the step you've been waiting to take, the exhaustion that arrives precisely when genuine momentum was beginning to build, the relationships that become unexpectedly complicated precisely when you're finding your clearest sense of direction. This is the adapted self's response to a genuine threat. And a soul moving toward authentic dharmic expression is, by definition, a genuine threat to the adapted self's dominance. Because a person living fully from their essential nature no longer needs the performance that the adapted self was constructed to sustain. The tradition does not say to push through this with force. Forced breakthroughs through resistance have a way of not sticking. Nor does it say to interpret the resistance as a signal to stop, which is precisely what the fear generating the resistance most wants you to do. The instruction is to meet the resistance with the same honest, compassionate attention you're learning to bring to everything else, to ask with genuine curiosity, what is this protecting? What does it believe is at risk? And what would it need to believe about your capacity, about the genuine rightness of this direction, about the field's support, to release its grip? Resistance approached this way becomes a teacher rather than an obstacle. One more dimension of self-knowledge that the practice of genuine alignment makes available. The felt signature of a life in alignment, the traditions consistently describe a recognizable signature of a soul moving, however imperfectly, in genuine alignment with its Dharma. The first is a specific quality of tiredness that is not depletion, the tiredness of complete engagement, of having given fully from what you genuinely have. The body is tired, the soul is fed. It rests differently than the exhaustion of performing the wrong life. The second is the growing irrelevance of external validation, not indifference to others. That's neither possible nor desirable for someone who understands their Dharma as inherently relational, but a growing independence of your sense of rightness from the need for external confirmation of it. The action taken from genuine alignment carries within it its own confirmation. It was real before it was received. The third is what the Vedic tradition called Ritambhara Pragya, the mind in which the right thing spontaneously presents itself at the right moment. The experience of meaningful coincidence, the right person appearing, the right door opening, not magic, the precise responsiveness of a field that registers the frequency of genuine alignment and reflects back toward it the people and opportunities and encounters that resonate at the same level. The fourth, perhaps the most quietly radical, is the gradual dissolution of the desperate search for purpose. Not because the question has been answered and filed away, but because the life being lived has become, moment by moment, choice by choice, increasingly the answer. Chapter 6. The gift the world has been waiting for. We have come finally to the part that changes the whole, not the personal implications of dharmic living. Those are significant, and we've covered them. The collective ones, the ones that reframe the question of your personal purpose into something far more urgent and far more consequential than any single life can contain. Your Dharma is not only yours, it never was. The cosmic economy here is the teaching that the Vedic tradition preserved with particular care. The universe does not produce surplus souls. It does not assemble a specific configuration of gifts and wounds and hard-won wisdom, place it into a specific human life at a specific moment in history, and then regard the expression of that configuration as optional, as nice to have, as something the soul can choose to express or suppress, depending on how ready it feels or how favorable the odds appear. The cosmic economy, in the Dharmic understanding, operates on the principle of necessity. Every specific quality of consciousness that incarnates into a human life does so because it is needed, not appreciated, not welcome in certain contexts, and redundant in others. Needed, the way a specific instrument is needed by a symphony that was written for exactly that instrument's range and timbre. Remove it, and the music doesn't become slightly less beautiful. It becomes something structurally incomplete. You are that instrument. What the world loses when you withhold, there is a way of understanding the cost of an unlived Dharma that goes beyond the personal, beyond the ache of the individual who spent decades performing a borrowed identity, and asks a different and harder question. What does the world lose when you don't show up as what you actually are? The answer, in the precise language of this tradition, is specific, irreplaceable, and permanent within the scope of this lifetime The healing that only your particular quality of compassion could have offered is not offered by someone else. The specific understanding that only your combination of experience and sensitivity could have provided to the specific person who needed exactly that at the specific moment when they were open to receiving it is simply absent. The creative expression that only your particular angle of perception could have produced adds nothing to the world because it wasn't produced. None of these absences are visible. None of them announce themselves. They are felt rather than seen, present in the specific quality of a world that is missing something precise and irreplaceable. This is not said to produce guilt. The Dharmic tradition has no use for guilt as a motivator. It is said to produce something the tradition consistently identified as the most powerful and most reliable engine of sustained Dharmic action, the recognition of your own necessity. Not I want to contribute, not I would like to offer my gifts when I'm ready, but I am needed. What I carry cannot come from anyone else, and the absence of what I carry is a specific loss to the specific world that intersected with my existence. That understanding, held clearly and returned to honestly, does not depend on inspiration, which fluctuates. It does not depend on external validation, which is unreliable. It does not depend on perfect conditions, which never arrive. It depends only on the clear-eyed recognition that you are here because you are necessary. The ripple you cannot see. One of the most consistently underestimated aspects of Dharmic contribution is the scope of its reach. There is a deep and pervasive misconception that the significance of a gift can be measured by the number of people it visibly touches, that the contribution which reaches thousands is more dharmic than the one which reaches one, that the work which reshapes systems or movements is more necessary than the conversation that reshapes a single moment between two people at the precise moment when one of them needed exactly what the other had to offer. The ancient traditions have never taught this. They have consistently taught the opposite. What modern complexity theory has recently articulated as sensitive dependence on initial conditions, the butterfly effect, the wisdom traditions understood intuitively without the mathematics thousands of years earlier. The teacher, whose single precisely offered insight changed the direction of a student's life, did not witness the full consequence of that change, did not see the lives that student touched, the work they went on to create, the understanding they passed forward, the chain of genuine transmission that ran forward through decades from a single moment of one person fully offering what they had to another who needed it. Your contribution, the specific quality of what you have to offer, expressed with full commitment and genuine presence in the contexts your actual life provides, is a link in chains you will never fully see, reaching people you will never meet, arriving at moments you will not be present for, doing work that begins where your visibility ends. This is not metaphor. This is the literal mechanism by which the world is changed. The question of scale. If every soul has a specific and irreplaceable Dharma, does that mean every soul's contribution is equally dramatic, equally visible, equally legible to the world as purposeful? No. And understanding why not is essential. The Dharmic tradition does not operate on a hierarchy of gifts. It does not rank the world historical contributions of famous people above the quiet, consistent, entirely unwitnessed contributions of people whose gifts express themselves in contexts that history will not record. The parent who raised a child with a specific quality of unconditional presence, a presence so real and so consistent that the child was allowed to become fully themselves, is not fulfilling a lesser dharma than the person whose name is attached to their contribution in some public record. The neighbor who showed up with specificity and genuine care in the week of someone's crisis, not because it was convenient, but because something in them recognized the necessity, is not participating less meaningfully in the cosmic economy than the person whose purpose expressed itself on a stage. The Dharmic law is not impressed by visibility. It is responsive to genuineness, to the complete, unhedged, fully committed offering of what is actually yours to give, in whatever form and at whatever scale the specific circumstances of your life make available. The turning point. You are already A. There is something important to say about the moment in history in which you are reading this. The ancient Vedic tradition understood time not as a linear march from past to future, but as a cyclical movement through ages of consciousness, each characterized by a different quality of collective human awareness. The traditions were remarkably consistent in identifying the current era as a transition point, a period of profound and disorienting movement between the age of separation and something genuinely different. That transition does not happen through systems or technologies, though both play their roles. It happens through the accumulated choices of individual souls who decide one by one, in the specific context of their specific lives, that the performed life is no longer sufficient, that the borrowed identity has been worn long enough, that the gift they came here to offer is more important than the comfort of withholding it. Every soul that moves more fully into alignment with its Dharma is not merely fulfilling a personal destiny. It is participating in the most consequential collective act available to a human being in this particular era of history. The demonstration, not in theory, but in lived embodied practice, that another way of being human is possible. The Dharma you have already been living. Before we arrive at the end of this journey, something needs to be said with care, because an exploration of Dharmic law at this depth can produce, in the sincere soul that encounters it, a particular and understandable response. The feeling that it hasn't started yet, that the Dharmic life is somewhere ahead, waiting to be entered, and that everything before this moment, the detours, the compromises, the years in the borrowed identity, the gifts expressed only partially and purpose-sensed but never fully claimed, doesn't count. The traditions correct this gently but firmly. You have already been living your Dharma, imperfectly, partially, in the complicated, compromise-filled, thoroughly human way that all Dharma is lived by souls still in the process of evolution, but living it nonetheless. In every moment of genuine care you extend it to someone else without calculation of what you get back. In every instance of honest expression that cost you something, but was offered anyway. In every creative act that came from somewhere deeper than approval-seeking. In every time you were fully present to someone who needed exactly that quality of presence and couldn't have received it from anyone else. The Dharmic law does not evaluate contribution only at the peaks of obvious purpose. It registers the entire texture of a life. Every ordinary moment in which the essential self broke through the performance, however briefly, however incompletely, and offered something genuine to the world. All of it counted. All of it was, in the precise and compassionate intelligence of the field, already the contribution the world needed. Already the gift being given. The world that has been waiting. We arrive, finally, at the thing the ancient teachers across every tradition preserve this wisdom to say. The Vedic sages who first articulated the Dharmic law were not offering a philosophy of personal fulfillment. They were describing a cosmic reality. The reality that the universe assembles specific consciousness, places it into specific lives, and that the expression of that consciousness is not optional, not ancillary, not a luxury the soul might pursue if circumstances permit. Necessary. The Buddhist masters who understood individual purpose within the context of collective liberation were not speaking metaphorically. The Sufi poets who wrote of the soul's unique and irreplaceable place in the order of things were not being decorative. The Egyptian initiates who understood each soul's contribution as a structural element of cosmic order were not exaggerating. They were all pointing from their different languages and centuries and cultures at the same truth. You are not here as an observer of a world being shaped by more essential souls. You are here as a participant, a necessary one. Assembled with a precision the universe does not waste on the dispensable. Carrying a specific quality of consciousness, a specific configuration of gifts, a specific angle of perception and understanding and creative capacity and compassionate presence that the world cannot receive from any other source. The Dharmic law has always known this about you, even in the seasons when you forgot it, even in the years when the borrowed life felt so complete and so permanent that the essential self seemed more like a distant possibility than a recoverable reality. The field has held your Dharma for you through all of it, with the patience of an intelligence that exists outside of time. With the certainty of a law that does not waver, the moment of genuine offering always comes for every soul. Every gift, however long withheld, finds its way eventually to the world that was waiting for it. The thread of genuine purpose, however tangled by the weight of the performed life, remains intact at its core, always available to be picked up, always capable of leading the soul that is finally ready to follow it home. You are the answer to a need the world has been carrying, specifically, precisely, irreplaceably, since before you had language for your own name. The only thing that was ever required was the choice, made once and then made again in the next moment and the next after that. The choice to stop performing the life that was expected and start living the one that was always from the very beginning of your existence, irreversibly and completely and magnificently yours. That choice is available to you right now. It has always been available. And the world that has been waiting for what you carry, with the same patience the Dharmic law brings to all things, the same certainty the field brings to every soul it knows to be necessary, is still waiting, with perfect faith that you are already on your way. Final words. You didn't come to this by accident. The part of you that stayed until the end, that moved through the long, sometimes uncomfortable journey of actually considering that your life might be designed to mean something specific, that part already knows what the next step is. It always has. Take one step today, not tomorrow, not when you're more ready or more certain or more settled. Today, in the direction of what this moved in you. That step is Dharma. That step is the world receiving something it needed. And if this reached something real in you, pass it forward. The act of sharing a genuine gift is itself dharmic always.